Chapter 1. A Death at the Gala. The grand ballroom of Clarendon Manor had been a picture of elegance before the tragedy struck. Gilded chandeliers cast a golden glow over the attendees, the air fragrant with imported roses and the delicate spice of expensive colognes. Lady Eleanor Whitcomb's charity gala had drawn London's elite, diplomats, socialites, and a few dubious aristocrats whose fortunes were as mysterious as their pasts. Among them was Philip Arkwright, a man of quiet power in the world of fine art dealings. Known for his calculating mind and an unwillingness to part with a single shilling more than necessary, Arkwright had built his reputation on secrecy and suspicion. Yet for all his guarded nature, it seemed there was something he had not revealed, not to his peers, not even to those closest to him. Because that evening, a man who looked exactly like him had walked into the ballroom. It had started as a murmur, a ripple of unease moving through the party. Guests turned, whispered, pointed. Two men, identical in every way, stood just feet apart. One, Mr. Arkwright, nursing a glass of port with his usual detached expression. The other, an impossible duplicate, scanning the room with an air of quiet amusement. Then the lights flickered. A brief darkness, a collective gasp. When the light returned, Philip Arkwright was dead. He lay crumpled at the base of the grand staircase, his face frozen in an expression of shock. A thin crimson thread of blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, staining the pristine marble. And the twin, the impossible man, was gone. Poirot arrives. It was precisely 27 minutes later when Hercule Poirot arrived at Clarendon Manor, stepping out of a sleek black car with the kind of deliberation that suggested he was arriving at a private appointment rather than a crime scene. His immaculate grey suit bore not a single crease, and his polished shoes gleamed in the gaslight of the estate's grand entrance. At his side, Captain Arthur Hastings struggled to adjust his coat, his face still bearing the bewildered expression he had worn since reading about the incident in the evening papers. "Poirot," Hastings said as they approached the grand doors, "this may be the most bizarre murder yet. A dead man and a missing twin. But Arkwright didn't have a twin." Poirot merely raised an eyebrow, tapping his gloved fingers together. "Ah, mon ami, that is what makes this so fascinating. If a man has a twin, but no one knew he existed, then we must ask, was he truly a twin at all?" Before Hastings could question him further, Chief Inspector Japp appeared at the doorway, his expression one of mild exasperation. "About time you showed up, Poirot. We've got a room full of London's finest in a state of hysteria, a body that doesn't make sense, and a witness who swears the dead man spoke his own name before collapsing." Poirot's moustache twitched slightly, a sign that he was intrigued. "Curious indeed, mon cher Japp. But tell me, have you considered the true question?" Japp sighed. "And what's that?" Poirot smiled, his eyes shining with sharp amusement. "Not who killed Philip Arkwright, but rather who was he killed in place of?" Chapter 2. The Gathering of Suspects. Hercule Poirot stepped into the grand entrance hall of Clarendon Manor, his sharp green eyes sweeping the room with the precision of a man cataloguing every detail, no matter how insignificant it seemed. "Ud air still carried the scent of perfume, cigar smoke, and something far less pleasant. The lingering tension of a murder freshly committed. Captain Hastings followed closely, rubbing his hands together against the slight chill. "It's a ghastly business, Poirot," he muttered, casting a glance toward the grand staircase where Philip Arkwright's lifeless body still lay, his face frozen in what seemed to be a mixture of shock and terror. Chief Inspector Japp stood over the corpse, flipping through a small black notebook. "The body hasn't been moved," he said as he noticed Poirot approaching, "and the medical examiner is on his way, but from the looks of it, there's no sign of an external wound, just a bit of blood at the mouth." Poirot knelt carefully, his hands folded behind his back, and examined the body closely. The dead man's tuxedo was immaculate, save for a small wrinkle at the lapel. His hand clutched a silk handkerchief, monogrammed with an elegant P.A. Poirot gently touched the man's left shoe, noting that it was scuffed. Curious for a man of such refined taste. "Japp," Poirot murmured, "you say there is no wound, but tell me, does a man who dies of natural causes often have such an expression upon his face?" Japp grunted. "I don't like it either, but we won't know for sure what did him in until the post-mortem." Hastings peered over Poirot's shoulder. "You don't think he was poisoned, do you?" Poirot slowly rose to his feet, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. "The trickery of poison would certainly explain the lack of visible injury. But there is something else here, mon ami, something that does not quite fit." Hastings frowned. "What's that?" Poirot turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping the assembled guests. "The reactions of the witnesses. Observe, Hastings, who among them is truly afraid? The guests of Clarendon Manor, a lavish drawing-room. The remaining guests of the gala were gathered, their faces pale, their voices hushed with unease. Every person in that room had witnessed the impossible. Philip Arkwright's death and the eerie presence of his identical twin. Poirot surveyed the room methodically, his gaze darting from one guest to another, measuring every flicker of expression, every nervous tick. There was Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, the hostess, her gloved hands clutching a pearl necklace so tightly her knuckles had turned white. A woman of stature and elegance, she had been a patron of the arts for decades. Beside her stood Rupert Langley, a wiry man in his 50s, with a pinched expression and restless fingers that drummed against his glass of brandy. A financier with extensive dealings in the art world, he had worked closely with Arkwright on several lucrative acquisitions. Near the window, a young woman dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Miss Veronica Arkwright, the victim's distant cousin, and his sole living relative. She was pale, shaken, her deep red gown a stark contrast against her ivory skin. To her left, Dr. Alistair Montague, a physician with sharp blue eyes and an impeccable white dinner jacket, observed the room with clinical detachment. He was known for his keen intellect and an unfortunate tendency toward arrogance. And finally, Charles Pembroke, an art historian, whose reputation was as pristine as his bespoke suit. He stood stiffly by the fireplace, his fingers wrapped around his gold-rimmed spectacles, his eyes betraying an emotion Poirot could not yet place. The first question's Lady Eleanor was the first to speak as Poirot entered the room. "Monsieur, Poirot, this is a nightmare," she whispered. "Philip, he was a difficult man, yes, but to be murdered, here, in my home, it is unthinkable." Poirot offered her a small, reassuring nod. "Madame, if you please, I shall ask only a few questions for now. It is important, n'est-ce pas, to understand what was seen." He turned his gaze upon Miss Veronica Arkwright, whose eyes were rimmed red. "Mademoiselle, I understand that you are Mr. Arkwright's cousin." She gave a weak nod. "Yes, but we were not close. Philip, he was a private man." Her voice trembled slightly. "I hardly knew him." "And yet," Poirot murmured, "you attended this gala. Did he invite you?" She hesitated. "No, I was invited by Lady Eleanor. Never expected Philip to be here." Poirot let that pass for the moment. He turned to Rupert Langley. "Monsieur Langley, I understand you had business dealings with the deceased." Langley's lips tightened into a thin line. "We worked together on occasion, yes. But Arkwright was a ruthless man. He had no loyalty to anyone but himself." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You imply that he had enemies?" Langley's hand twitched slightly. "I don't know what you mean." Poirot said nothing, merely let his silence stretch until Langley looked away. Next, he addressed Dr. Montague. "Doctor, you were present in the ballroom when Mr. Arkwright collapsed, were you not?" The doctor nodded. "Yes, it was quite sudden. One moment he was standing at the base of the stairs, looking, well, startled. Then he clutched his chest, made a strangled sound, and collapsed." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "You did not attempt to revive him?" Montague exhaled, his expression one of irritation. "I examined him immediately. There was nothing to be done. He was dead within seconds." Poirot glanced at Charles Pembroke, who had remained quiet. "And you, Monsieur Pembroke, did you see the so-called twin?" Pembroke pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Yes, at least I thought I did. It was terribly odd. Philip Arkwright standing by, the staircase, yet another man, identical to him, just beyond the crowd." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Did anyone speak to this mysterious twin?" Pembroke hesitated. Well, I don't know. The lights went out only moments later." A silence settled over the group. Poirot tapped his fingers against his chin, his mind already working through the contradictions. The missing twin Hastings shifted uncomfortably. "Poirot, what do you make of it? A man who didn't have a twin suddenly does, and now he's dead." Poirot folded his arms. "Consider, mon ami, was there ever a twin at all?" Hastings blinked. "But everyone saw him." Poirot tilted his head. "Did they? Or did they see what they thought they saw?" Lady Eleanor gasped. "You mean an impersonation?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps. Or perhaps something more clever still." Japp strode into the room, just then, a piece of paper in hand. "Well, Poirot, here's something interesting. The staff checked the guest list. No twin brother, no look-alike. But they found this in Arkwright's coat pocket." He handed Poirot the paper. Poirot unfolded it, his sharp eyes scanning the single line of text. "You should not have come tonight. You know why." Poirot turned the note over. No signature, no identifying marks. He smiled, faintly. "Ah, mon cher Japp, I believe we are dealing with a most peculiar game indeed," Japp sighed. "Let me guess, you already have a theory?" Poirot tilted his head. "Mais oui, mon ami. But first, let us discover who precisely was Philip Arkwright. Chapter 3. The shadow in the mirror the gathering of suspects had provided Poirot with much to consider. Yet the most tantalizing question still remained. Had Philip Arkwright truly seen his twin before his death? As Poirot paced the drawing-room, his hands clasped behind his back, Hastings watched him with a mixture of admiration and frustration. "Poirot," he said, lowering his voice, "you don't mean to say this whole business about a twin is an illusion? Everyone at the gala saw the man." Poirot arched an eyebrow. "Ah, mon ami, what the eyes see and what the mind believes are two separate matters. Consider, if you were to look into a mirror and see a shadow that should not be there, would you not believe in ghosts?" Hastings frowned. "Well, if I saw it, précisément. The power of suggestion, Hastings. It can make people believe even the most impossible of things." Poirot turned to Japp. "Chief Inspector, let us first confirm something very simple. Have your men found any record of Philip Arkwright having a twin?" Japp sighed and pulled out his notebook. "Checked the registry, checked the birth records. No twin. Philip Arkwright was an only child. No long-lost brother, no illegitimate sibling. Whatever this other Philip was, he wasn't family." Poirot nodded as if he had expected this. "And what of his personal effects? Did he receive any letters, telegrams, or calls before the gala?" Japp flipped through a few more pages. "We checked his suite. Nothing unusual, except that one note I gave you earlier. You should not have come tonight. You know why. Other than that, his correspondence seems ordinary. Business dealings, some exchanges with art dealers. Nothing to suggest a threat." Poirot stroked his moustache thoughtfully. "No apparent enemies, yet a warning. No twin, yet a room full of witnesses who saw one. Tell me, Japp, did you find anything in his personal belongings that might suggest he was expecting someone?" Japp hesitated. "Funny you ask. His valet said Arkwright asked him to press an extra tuxedo before the gala, but no one saw him bring a second guest." Poirot's eyes brightened. "An extra tuxedo?" Japp nodded. "Exactly like the one he was wearing when he died. Perfectly identical." "Curieux," Poirot murmured. "The mirror image of himself, prepared in advance. Tell me, Japp, was this second tuxedo found?" Japp's expression darkened. "No, it's missing. A room left." Undisturbed, the trio, Poirot, Hastings, and Japp, made their way upstairs to Philip Arkwright's private suite, a luxurious corner room on the second floor of Clarendon Manor. The moment they entered, Poirot's sharp eyes flitted over the surroundings. A mahogany desk stood against the far wall, covered with neatly arranged papers and correspondence. The four-poster bed was untouched, its silk sheets still perfectly smoothed over. A gold pocket watch rested atop the bedside table, alongside a small glass of water that had not been touched. Poirot moved to the wardrobe, where a selection of finely tailored suits hung, each pressed to perfection. But one space was noticeably empty. "Japp," Poirot murmured, gesturing toward the gap between two jackets. "The missing tuxedo. It was kept here, yes?" Japp nodded. "The valet confirmed it. Said Arkwright made a point of setting it aside himself before the party." Poirot's fingers lightly touched the wooden hanger, still hanging in place. "And yet it is gone." Hastings let out a low whistle. "Poirot, Do you think someone stole it? Or—" He hesitated. "Do you think Arkwright gave it to someone?" Poirot gave a small smile. "Mon cher Hastings, I do not think I know." Japp crossed his arms. "You mean he expected this impostor? What kind of game was he playing?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped toward the mirror above the dresser and examined its polished surface. He reached forward, running a gloved finger along its edge, then turned back to Japp. "You say Philip Arkwright had no twin. But consider this, mes amis. What if he had a double?" Hastings blinked. "A double?" "An impostor," Poirot clarified. "Someone who looked strikingly similar to him, enough to be mistaken for his twin, especially in dim lighting, among guests who had been drinking champagne." Japp scowled. "So you think Arkwright knew someone was going to impersonate him? Why the devil wouldn't he tell anyone?" Poirot smiled. "That, Chief Inspector, is precisely what we must uncover." A curious disappearance. Before they could delve further, there was a knock at the door. A constable entered, looking slightly out of breath. "Inspector Japp, sir. We've got a situation." Japp frowned. "What now?" The medical examiner just finished his initial assessment of Arkwright's body. No stab wounds, no gunshot wounds, no obvious signs of trauma. But here's the strange part. There's no trace of poison in his system either. Poirot's expression did not change, but Hastings could see a spark of intense interest in his eyes. "No poison?" Hastings repeated. "Then what did kill him?" The constable shifted uncomfortably. "The doctor says it looks like he collapsed from shock." Hastings gaped. Shock? But what could have frightened him so much that it killed him? Poirot's voice was smooth, deliberate. "Ah, Hastings, do you not see? Monsieur Arkwright was a man of logic, of calculation. What if, in his final moments, he saw something so impossible that his mind could not accept it?" Japp scratched his head. "You're suggesting he saw something, what? Supernatural?" Poirot shook his head. "Non, mon ami. Not supernatural, but something unnatural. The missing guest." Just as Poirot finished speaking, another constable rushed in. "Sir, we've searched every room, every corridor. There's no sign of the second Philip Arkwright anywhere." Hastings glanced at Poirot. "He vanished." Poirot exhaled, his gaze flickering toward the missing tuxedo's empty space. "Non, mon ami. He did not vanish. He was never truly here." Hastings frowned. "But he was here. People saw him." Poirot gave Hastings an indulgent smile. "They saw what they were meant to see." Japp threw up his hands. "You're talking in circles, Poirot. If he wasn't here, then where the devil is the missing tuxedo?" Poirot's lips pressed together. "That, Chief Inspector, is the question we must answer. And I believe we must do so quickly. For you see, mes amis, whoever wore that tuxedo last may have been the only person in this house who truly knew why Philip Arkwright had to die." Japp's eyes narrowed. "Then I'd say we have a murderer on the loose." Poirot's expression turned grave. "Mais oui, and if my suspicions are correct, mon cher Japp, this murderer is not finished yet." Chapter 4. The Second Disappearance. A heavy silence settled over the room as Poirot's words lingered in the air. Hastings shifted uncomfortably, his mind grappling with the detective's implications. A murderer on the loose? He echoed. But if this impostor disappeared into thin air, how do we find him? For all we know, he's already miles away. Japp crossed his arms, his brow furrowed in irritation. Or still hiding under our noses. We've got constables watching every exit. No one has left since the body was found. Poirot remained still, his hands steepled as he considered the facts. Then, mes amis, our murderer is still here, but do not assume he or she will remain passive. No, I fear we have yet to see the full extent of their plan. Japp sighed, rubbing his temples. Just what I needed. Another cryptic prophecy from you, Poirot. Poirot simply smiled. Not a prophecy, mon cher Japp. A calculation, and unless we move swiftly, I suspect we shall soon have another crime on our hands. A new development. Before Japp could argue, the door burst open and a constable rushed inside, breathless. "Inspector!" he gasped. "There's been another—" He hesitated, his eyes darting to Poirot and Hastings. "Spit it out, man!" Japp snapped. "A disappearance, sir." Japp's entire demeanour changed. "Who's missing?" "Miss Evelyn Harcourt, sir. One of the guests from the gala. No one has seen her since last night. Her bed hasn't been slept in, and her maid swears she never returned to her room." Hastings felt a chill crawl down his spine. Evelyn Harcourt? But she was one of the last people to speak with Arkwright before he died. Poirot nodded gravely. And therefore she was one of the last people to see the impostor. Japp straightened. "Right. We'll search every inch of this house. If she's hiding something, we'll find her." But Poirot raised a hand. "No, Chief Inspector. You misunderstand. Miss Harcourt is not hiding. She has been taken." A hush fell over the room. "Taken?" Hastings repeated, his voice hoarse. "By whom?" Poirot's gaze was unreadable. "By the same person who wished Philip Arkwright dead. The question, mon ami, is whether she is still alive to tell us why. A clue. In the garden, Japp wasted no time in ordering a full search of the estate. Every guest room, corridor, and locked chamber was combed through, but there was no trace of Evelyn Harcourt. It was not until nearly an hour later that a nervous constable approached them outside the manor, his face pale. "Sir, we found something. In the gardens." The three men followed the constable toward the rose garden at the rear of the estate. The early morning mist had settled over the hedges, giving the entire scene an eerie stillness. The constable led them to a small secluded alcove where the dew-damp grass had been disturbed. Poirot knelt, his sharp eyes scanning the ground. The remains of a crushed wine-glass lay near the bench, its shattered pieces glinting in the faint sunlight. A silk shawl, Evelyn Harcourt's shawl, was draped over the backrest. Hastings felt his stomach twist. She was here. Poirot picked up a single fragment of glass, rolling it between his gloved fingers. "Oui, mon ami," and something startled her. Japp examined the area. "If she struggled, there should be footprints, but I don't see any signs of a fight." Poirot gestured toward the damp earth beneath the bench. "Observe, Chief Inspector. The ground here is soft, yet there is no impression of a person lying down. If Miss Harcourt had fallen unconscious, we would see the imprint of her body." Hastings frowned. "Then what are you suggesting?" Poirot's voice was firm. "She was taken. Hastings, but not by force. She either left willingly or was made to believe she should. Japp let out a frustrated sigh. You mean she knew her attacker? Poirot stood, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. Perhaps. Or perhaps our murderer is so clever that they convinced her they were someone else entirely. The guest list mystery. The growing unease within Clarendon Manor had turned the once lively gala guests into fearful whisperers. The disappearance of Evelyn Harcourt had sent ripples of anxiety through the remaining attendees, and none seemed eager to remain within the house any longer than necessary. Poirot, however, had other plans. He returned to the grand ballroom, where the gala had taken place just the night before. The chandeliers had been dimmed, and the polished floor now seemed eerily empty. He approached the guest list, which had been carefully maintained by the evening's host. His fingers trailed down the elegant script, pausing briefly before he turned to Japp. "Tell me, Chief Inspector, how many guests did you count last night?" Japp frowned. 87, including the staff. Why? Poirot's expression did not change, but Hastings could see the unmistakable gleam in his eyes, the one that meant he had found something. Curious, Poirot murmured, tapping the parchment, because the official guest list only accounts for 86. Hastings straightened. What? You mean someone was here who wasn't invited? Exactement, mon ami, Poirot said softly. A person who did not belong, yet moved so seamlessly among the crowd that no one questioned them. Japp swore under his breath. The impostor! Poirot's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. And perhaps the same person who now has Evelyn Harcourt in their grasp. A dangerous gamble hours passed with no sign of the missing woman. The tension inside the manor had reached an unbearable peak, and even Japp, usually the embodiment of unshakable authority, was beginning to show signs of frustration. Hastings found Poirot seated in the drawing-room, a thoughtful frown upon his face. Poirot, you've been quiet for far too long. Do you have a plan? Poirot inclined his head slightly. But of course, Hastings. You see, there is one detail that our murderer did not anticipate. And what's that? Poirot's eyes gleamed. That Hercule Poirot is not so easily deceived. He stood abruptly. Come, mon ami, we must set a trap. Japp, who had just entered the room, raised an eyebrow. A trap? What kind of trap? Poirot smoothed the front of his jacket. One designed to draw our killer out of hiding. But first, I require an announcement to be made. Japp scowled. What kind of announcement? Poirot's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. You must inform the guests and staff that the police have found Evelyn Harcourt, and that she is currently being questioned in private. Hastings nearly dropped his teacup. But that's a lie. Poirot's moustache twitched. Ah, mon ami, it is a calculated lie. If our murderer believes Miss Harcourt is alive and speaking to the police, what do you think they will do? Japp's face darkened as he caught on. They'll panic. They'll try to silence her. Poirot nodded. Exactement. And when they do, we shall be waiting. A visitor in the night as evening fell. The tension inside the manor grew thicker. Poirot and Hastings waited inside a darkened side chamber, while Japp had stationed constables near every exit. And then, just past midnight, the trap was sprung. A shadow moved swiftly down the hall, slipping toward the study where Poirot had claimed Evelyn Harcourt was being held. The figure hesitated outside the door, then turned the handle. In a single fluid motion, Poirot stepped forward, the light flickering on. "Ah," he murmured. "I thought it might be you." The figure froze, caught in the act. Hastings gasped. "Good heavens! It's—" Chapter 5. The trap springs. Shut. The study was dimly lit, a single gas lamp casting long shadows across the mahogany-panelled walls. The moment the figure froze, Poirot stepped fully into view, his silhouette crisp and composed. Hastings, standing just behind him, felt his breath catch in his throat. "Good heavens," Hastings whispered. "It's you." The intruder remained still for a fraction of a second longer, before suddenly whirling around, making a desperate dash toward the door. But Japp was faster. The chief inspector lunged forward, gripping the figure's wrist in an iron grasp. "Not so fast, sunshine," Japp growled, spinning them back toward the light. The glow of the gas lamp illuminated the face of Lucian Graves, the personal secretary to Lord Clarendon. Hastings stared in astonishment. "You? Graves, usually so impeccably composed, was now dishevelled, his collar askew and his dark eyes darting wildly between the three men. "This is a mistake," he stammered. I was only looking for something." Poirot raised an elegant eyebrow. "Oui, Monsieur Graves. You were looking for Miss Harcourt, were you not?" Graves swallowed, then let out a nervous chuckle. "I don't know what you mean. I simply—" Poirot's voice was gentle, but his words were razor-sharp. "You thought she was here, n'est-ce pas? Because the police announced that she had been found." Graves's face twitched. "But, mon cher," Poirot continued, his voice growing softer, "Miss Harcourt was never found. She is still missing, and yet you came here to silence her." A stunned silence filled the room. Japp tightened his grip. "You're looking guiltier by the second, Graves. Care to explain yourself?" Graves licked his lips, his composure cracking. I had no intention of harming her. I only wanted to speak with her. Speak with a woman who has disappeared under suspicious circumstances." Hastings snapped. "That hardly sounds innocent." Graves hesitated. Poirot studied him carefully. The man's demeanour was not one of cold calculation, but of frantic desperation. "Because me, Monsieur Graves," Poirot said at last. "Are you acting out of fear?" Graves exhaled sharply, as though Poirot had struck upon the truth. He said nothing. Poirot turned to Japp. "A search of his personal quarters may be enlightening, Chief Inspector. I suspect our friend here is hiding something." Graves' face paled, but he remained silent as two constables led him away. As the door closed behind them, Hastings turned to Poirot. "Well, do you think he's the killer?" Poirot folded his arms. "No, Hastings. Graves is not a murderer, but he knows more than he lets on." Japp scowled. "So, if he's not our man, why try to break into the study?" Poirot tapped his temple. "Ah, mon ami, because he believes Miss Harcourt is alive, and that," his voice grew quiet, "means that she may yet be found." A hidden letter, the search of Graves' quarters yielded something far more intriguing than expected. Among his neatly arranged correspondence, Poirot found a single, crumpled note, hastily tucked inside a book on Lord Clarendon's financial dealings. The note read, I saw what happened. You must meet me at once. No one else can know. The garden. Midnight. There was no signature. Japp cursed under his breath. Looks like Evelyn Harcourt arranged a meeting that night. But with whom? Poirot's fingers traced the paper thoughtfully. It would seem that Miss Harcourt knew something important, and it is likely that knowledge led to her disappearance. Hastings's stomach twisted. You think she was lured into a trap? Poirot nodded solemnly. Oui, and our murderer is playing a most dangerous game. The secret in the attic with Graves detained for questioning, Poirot turned his attention back to the manor. Something about the architecture of the estate had been bothering him. Come, Hastings, Poirot announced. We must investigate the attic. Hastings blinked. The attic? What could possibly be up there? Poirot merely smiled. That, mon ami, is what we must discover. The upper level of the manor was thick with dust, its wooden beams stretching into darkness. Japp, now accustomed to Poirot's whims, reluctantly followed as they pushed open the creaking attic door. Inside, the space was filled with old furniture trunks and forgotten relics, but Poirot's eyes were drawn to a single wardrobe in the farthest corner. He strode toward it with purpose. Aha! This, I believe, is what we seek. Hastings frowned. A wardrobe. Poirot ran a gloved hand along its edge before pulling open the doors. Inside hung a row of identical black suits, the same kind Philip Arkwright had been wearing when he died. Japp let out a low whistle. So someone had a disguise prepared in advance. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And yet, Chief Inspector, there is one missing. Japp's expression darkened, meaning the murderer could still be among us, dressed as Arkwright's twin. Poirot nodded. Oui. And that means the impostor may strike again. A voice in the dark that night. As Hastings lay in bed, he found himself unable to sleep. Poirot's deductions had set his mind racing. If the murderer had a disguise, could they still be moving freely inside the manor? He turned restlessly, when suddenly a soft knock sounded against his door. His breath caught. The knock was hesitant, almost uncertain. Slowly he rose, reaching for the pistol he kept in his bedside drawer. "Who's there?" he called softly. A pause, then a whisper. "Help me!" Hastings' heart pounded. The voice was faint, trembling with fear, but unmistakable. It was Evelyn Harcourt. Chapter 6. The woman who wasn't there for a moment. Hastings was frozen in place, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. The voice outside his door. It was unmistakable. Evelyn Harcourt. But that was impossible. She had vanished without a trace. The entire household had assumed she was either dead or being held captive somewhere. And yet, she was here. Heart pounding, Hastings reached for his pistol, gripping it tightly as he moved toward the door. Slowly, carefully, he turned the handle and pulled it open. The dimly lit corridor stretched before him, lined with heavy wooden doors and antique sconces flickering weakly. But there was no one there. He stepped forward, glancing left and right. "Miss Harcourt," he called softly. Silence. A chill ran down his spine. Had he imagined it? The voice had been real. He was certain of it. He took another cautious step into the hallway, when suddenly A shadow moved. Hastings spun around, raising his pistol instinctively. But he was too late. A cold, gloved hand clamped over his mouth from behind, yanking him backward into the darkness. Perilous situation, Hastings struggled, trying to break free, but his attacker was strong. The grip tightened, and he felt himself being dragged into a side chamber. Just as he was about to swing his elbow back, the grip released, and he stumbled forward. He whirled around, pistol raised. "Who the devil?" His words caught in his throat. Before him, standing in the dim glow of the moonlight filtering through a tall, narrow window, was Evelyn Harcourt. Her hair was dishevelled, her face pale, and her eyes wide with something that could have been fear or desperation. "Good heavens," Hastings breathed. "It really is you." She took a step forward. "You must listen to me, Captain Hastings. I have very little time." Still gripping his pistol, Hastings studied her warily. "Where have you been? Everyone's been looking for you. Poirot." "You must not tell him you saw me," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "Not yet." Hastings frowned. "Not tell Poirot? But why—" She shook her head. "I can't explain, not now. All I can tell you is that the man everyone thinks is dead is not dead at all." Hastings felt the blood drain from his face. "You mean Philip Arkwright?" She nodded. "But not in the way you think. The real Philip Arkwright was never here to begin with." Hastings blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Evelyn gasped and stepped back into the shadows. "I must go. Please, Captain Hastings, say nothing to Poirot. Not yet." Before Hastings could stop her, she turned and vanished into the darkness. Poirot's insight. The next morning, Hastings sat across from Poirot in the breakfast room, his mind still racing. The detective, impeccably dressed as always, studied him with keen interest. "You are troubled, mon ami," Poirot observed. "Your moustache is most agitated this morning." Hastings started. "My what?" Poirot gestured delicately. "Your habit, Hastings. You twitch your moustache when something perplexes you. And yet you have said nothing of importance since you sat down. Why is that?" Hastings hesitated. He had promised Evelyn he would say nothing, but lying to Poirot? That was another matter entirely. He began, then stopped. "Poirot, do you believe in ghosts?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, a most curious question, mon ami. And what prompts it?" Hastings hesitated. "Let us say, if someone believed they had seen a ghost, how would you explain it?" Poirot sipped his tea thoughtfully. "That would depend. Some ghosts are born from guilt, others from fear, and others still from clever deception." He tilted his head. "But I do not think, Hastings, that you ask this out of idle curiosity. Tell me, have you seen a ghost?" Hastings opened his mouth, then closed it again. Evelyn's warning echoed in his mind. He cleared his throat. No, nothing like that. Just a thought, old chap." Poirot did not look convinced. Just then, Japp strode in, looking uncharacteristically grim. "Well, gentlemen, I hope you've had your breakfast, because we've got another corpse on our hands." Poirot set down his tea. "Ah!" He folded his napkin carefully. "And who, pray, is dead this time?" Japp exhaled. "Lucien Graves, found in his cell this morning, strangled." A killer's reach, the scene at the police station was grim. Lucian Graves lay slumped in the corner of his cell, his neck bruised with the telltale marks of strangulation. "A suicide?" Hastings asked. Hesitantly, Japp snorted. "Not a chance. No way to do it to himself, not with these marks. Someone got to him." Poirot knelt, examining the body. He lifted one of Graves's limp hands, studying the fingertips. "Ah," he murmured. Hastings and Japp exchanged glances. "What is it?" Japp asked. Poirot gently placed the hand down. "The fingernails. Chief Inspector, they are clean." Japp frowned. "And that means—" Poirot stood, dusting off his gloves. "It means, mon cher, that Graves did not fight back. He knew his killer." A revelation in the study back at Clarendon Manor. Poirot paced the study, his mind working furiously. Hastings sat nearby, still wrestling with Evelyn's words. Finally, Poirot stopped and turned to him. "Hastings, I must ask you something most serious." Hastings straightened. "Of course, Poirot. Did you see Evelyn Harcourt last night?" The question struck like a bolt of lightning. Hastings felt his breath hitch. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Mon ami, I ask you once, and once only. If you lie to me, I shall know it." Hastings swallowed. His loyalty to Poirot battled against his promise to Evelyn. Finally he sighed. "Yes, I saw her." Poirot nodded, as if he had already known. "Bon, tell me exactly what she said." Hastings recounted everything. When he was done, Poirot steepled his fingers. "The real Philip Arkwright was never here," he murmured. "What could she mean by that?" Hastings asked. Poirot exhaled. "I suspect, Hastings, that the dead man is not Philip Arkwright at all." Hastings blinked. "Then who is he?" Poirot's eyes glowed with intensity. "That, mon ami, is the question we must answer. And we must answer it quickly, before the killer strikes again." Midnight summons. That night a letter was slipped under Poirot's door. "If you want the truth, come alone. The abandoned chapel. Midnight." No signature. Poirot studied the note, then turned to Hastings and Japp. "Gentlemen, it seems we are expected." Japp scowled. "Sounds like a bloody trap." Poirot smiled. "But of course, Chief Inspector. The question is, who is setting it?" With that, he folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. Let us find out. Chapter 7. The Abandoned Chapel at Midnight. The air was thick with anticipation as the carriage rattled down the moonlit road. Inside, Chief Inspector Japp shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tapping against his coat pocket, no doubt ensuring his revolver was within reach. Captain Hastings sat stiffly beside him, his expression wary, his thoughts no doubt still dwelling on the words of Evelyn Harcourt. Poirot, however, remained as composed as ever. He sat with his hands delicately clasped, eyes closed, deep in thought. Only the occasional twitch of his moustache revealed the rapid calculations whirring in his mind. "Poirot, are you certain about this?" Hastings finally asked, breaking the silence. This could very well be a trap. Poirot's lips curled into a small smile. "Mais oui, Hastings. That is precisely why we must go. A trap, after all, reveals the nature of the one who sets it." Japp grumbled. "I don't like it. Meeting a mysterious informant in an abandoned chapel at midnight. Might as well paint a target on our backs." Poirot opened his eyes. "And yet, Chief Inspector, here you are, accompanying us." Japp exhaled sharply. "Because if I let you go alone, you'd end up finding another dead body, probably yours." Poirot chuckled softly, but said nothing more. The carriage rolled to a stop before a dilapidated structure at the edge of an overgrown cemetery. The chapel, if it could still be called that, was little more than a crumbling ruin. The roof had partially collapsed, its skeletal frame stretching toward the sky like the fingers of some forgotten spectre. Vines crawled up the stone walls, their tendrils creeping through cracks like sinister veins. Hastings shivered. "Charming place. I assume ghosts are included in the visit." Japp stepped out first, revolver drawn. "Stay close, and keep your wits about you." Poirot followed at a leisurely pace, his gaze sweeping over the scene with methodical precision. "We are expected. Let us not keep our host waiting." A meeting with shadows inside, the chapel was eerily silent. Moonlight filtered through the broken, stained glass windows, casting shattered colours onto the stone floor. The scent of damp earth and decayed wood hung in the air. At the far end of the room near the altar, a figure stood cloaked in shadows. Hastings instinctively reached for his pistol, but Poirot held up a hand. "Patience, mon ami. Let us not frighten our informant before they have spoken." The figure shifted slightly. Then, in a low voice, it spoke. "You were followed." Japp tensed. "By whom?" The figure shook its head. "I do not know, but I heard movement. Outside as you entered, Poirot took a step forward. "You summoned us here, did you not?" A pause. Then, "Yes." "Then please, monsieur or madame, reveal yourself, so that we may discuss matters face to face." For a long moment, the figure hesitated. Then, stepping into the pale light, they removed the hood of their cloak. "Hastings!" gasped. It was Evelyn Harcourt, the truth about Philip Arkwright. Hastings had seen her just the night before, but now, standing before them, she looked even more fragile. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes, her cheekbones more pronounced. She clasped her hands tightly together, as though afraid they might betray her trembling. "Miss Harcourt," Poirot said gently, "you have risked much in coming here." She nodded. "And I have little time. Please listen to me carefully." Japp narrowed his eyes. "You'd better start talking, Miss Harcourt. What do you know about Philip Arkwright?" Evelyn took a deep breath. The man who was murdered at Clarendon Manor was not Philip Arkwright. Japp's jaw clenched. "Then who was he?" "I don't know his real name," she admitted. "But I do know this. He was an impostor. The real Philip Arkwright died many years ago." Hastings gaped. "But that's impossible. Lord Clarendon confirmed his identity himself." Evelyn shook her head. "Lord Clarendon believed he was Philip Arkwright, yes, but he was deceived. The man who came to Clarendon Manor was playing a role meant to manipulate the old man into changing his will." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, and you knew this because—" She hesitated. "Because I overheard a conversation. A month ago, I was passing by the study late at night and heard voices. The man posing as Philip Arkwright was arguing with someone. He said," she swallowed, "that the old fool had no idea who he really was." Hastings felt a cold chill. Who was he arguing with? Evelyn hesitated. I don't know. I couldn't see, but I believe whoever it was, they killed him. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Oui, that is most probable. Japp folded his arms. Why did you run, Miss Harcourt? Her expression darkened. Because I was afraid. The night before the murder, someone slipped a note under my door. It said, "You know too much. Leave, or you'll end up like him." A murder in the shadows. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the chapel. Hastings spun around. What was that? Poirot's face darkened. We are not alone. Japp lifted his gun. Stay behind me. They crept forward, every sense alert. The sound had come from behind the broken pews near the entrance. Japp moved cautiously, stepping around the wooden wreckage. A body lay sprawled on the floor, face down. Japp knelt, pressing 2 fingers to the neck. His face twisted into a grimace. Dead! Strangled! Poirot's moustache twitched. Ah, the killer is efficient. Hastings swallowed. Who is it? Japp rolled the body over. Moonlight illuminated the face. Hastings gasped. Good Lord, it's Marcus Wren! Marcus Wren, the lawyer responsible for handling Lord Clarendon's estate. Poirot crouched beside the body, his keen eyes scanning every detail. Chief Inspector, I would advise you to check his pockets. The manner of his death suggests he may have been carrying something someone did not wish him to share. Japp quickly searched Wren's coat. A moment later, he pulled out a crumpled letter. Hastings leaned in. What does it say? Japp unfolded it and read aloud. I have discovered the truth about Arkwright. Meet me at the chapel at midnight. I have evidence that will change everything. There was no signature. Japp exhaled. Well, that settles it. This was a set-up. The killer must have followed us, waited for Wren to show up, and silenced him before he could talk. Poirot stood, dusting off his gloves. His expression was unreadable. Yes, mon cher Japp, and that tells us something very important. Japp frowned. What's that? Poirot met his gaze. The killer is someone who knew Marcus Wren would be here tonight, and that means he turned toward Evelyn. Miss Harcourt, who else did you tell about this meeting? Evelyn's face went pale. No one. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Ah, but someone knew all the same. Hastings felt a creeping sense of dread. Poirot? Do you mean to say? Poirot adjusted his cuffs. Oui, mon ami. The killer is much closer than we think. The chapel fell silent. Somewhere in the darkness, beyond the broken windows, a watchful presence lingered. The game was far from over. Chapter 8. A clue, written in shadows. The stillness of the abandoned chapel was shattered by the weight of revelation. The body of Marcus Wren, the lawyer responsible for handling Lord Clarendon's estate, lay sprawled upon the damp stone floor, his face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. Evelyn Harcourt stood trembling, her hands clasped to her chest, while Hastings swallowed hard, his mind struggling to piece together the implications of what they had just uncovered. Poirot, ever composed, knelt beside the lifeless form, his sharp eyes studying every minute detail. Chief Inspector Japp kept his revolver raised, scanning the darkness for any movement, his jaw clenched in frustration. Blast it all, Japp muttered under his breath. We were so close. If Wren had lived just a few minutes longer, he could have told us everything. Poirot let out a quiet hum. "Ah, but mon cher Japp, even in death a man may yet speak, if one is willing to listen carefully." Japp grunted. "And what exactly is the dead man telling you, Poirot?" Without answering immediately, Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew a small silver magnifying glass. He ran it over the stiffened fingers of the corpse. Then, just as Hastings was about to ask what he was looking for, Poirot pointed. "Regardez, mes amis," he said, his voice laced with certainty. "The fingertips. Do you see it?" Hastings and Japp leaned in. At first glance, they saw nothing unusual, but then, under the moonlight streaming through the shattered stained-glass window, they noticed it. A faint smudge of ink on Wren's left index finger. "Good Lord," Hastings whispered. "He wrote something before he died," Japp cursed. "But where? There's nothing in his pockets except that letter." Poirot's gaze swept the room, his mind working at lightning speed. Then his eyes settled upon the stone floor beside Wren's body. He stood abruptly and stepped over the corpse. And there, scrawled in a shaky, near-invisible script upon the dust-covered ground, were a few letters smudged by hurried strokes. Japp crouched, squinting at the writing. "Looks like and something else, but it's smeared." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Oui, it seems Mr. Wren attempted to write a final message before succumbing to death." Evelyn Harcourt, still pale as a ghost, took a shaky breath. "It could be a name." Japp rubbed his chin. "Maybe. Could be Leonard or Lewis, or something else entirely." Poirot examined the dust closely, his keen mind processing possibilities. "Non, Chief Inspector, I do not believe it is a name. Instead, I believe Mr. Wren was trying to lead us somewhere." Hastings frowned. "Where?" Poirot stepped back, gesturing towards the crumbling chapel walls. "The answer, Hastings, is hidden in the architecture itself. You see, the word begins with L-E. What if it is part of something larger?" His eyes flickered to a half-collapsed archway at the back of the chapel, covered in ivy and forgotten by time. Above it, weathered and faint, was a Latin inscription carved into the stone. The letters, though worn, were still legible. Legatus. Japp straightened. "Legatus. That's Latin, isn't it?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, Chief Inspector. It means envoy or messenger. But in this case, it could be referring to something else entirely." Hastings furrowed his brow. But why would Marcus Wren write Lee in the dust? What was he trying to tell us? Poirot gave a knowing smile. "Patience, mon ami. Let us investigate, n'est-ce pas?" The hidden crypt with lanterns in hand, the group carefully navigated the broken remains of the chapel. The ivy-covered archway loomed before them, its edges crumbling with age. Japp, ever the pragmatist, tested the stones with his hands. "This thing's ancient. Could collapse any second." Poirot stepped forward, brushing away the ivy, his fingers tracing the outline of a symbol carved into the stone. A crest, almost imperceptible beneath centuries of erosion. Then he found it. A hidden lever embedded within the wall. "Stand back, mes amis," he murmured. With a precise motion, he pulled. A deep groan of shifting stone echoed through the chapel as the archway creaked open, revealing a dark passageway leading underground. Hastings let out a low whistle. "Good heavens! A hidden crypt? Poirot adjusted his cuffs. Indeed, Hastings, and I believe we are about to uncover something very important. Japp muttered a curse and tightened his grip on his revolver. If this place is some kind of death trap, I'm blaming you, Poirot. Poirot merely smiled. They descended carefully, their lanterns casting flickering shadows against damp stone walls. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of old parchment and decay. And then they saw it. A stone coffin, untouched for decades, sat at the centre of the chamber. And upon its lid the name Philip Arkwright was carved in elegant script. Hastings' breath caught. But that's impossible. Philip Arkwright was just murdered. Japp's face darkened. Or maybe Miss Harcourt was telling the truth all along. Maybe the real Philip Arkwright has been dead for years. Poirot nodded, running a gloved hand over the inscription. Yes, Chief Inspector, I believe this coffin holds the remains of the true Philip Arkwright. Evelyn shuddered. Then who was the man at Clarendon Manor? Poirot exhaled slowly. An impostor. A man who assumed the identity of a dead twin, but who made one fatal mistake. Hastings turned. And what was that? Poirot's eyes gleamed. He underestimated the intelligence of those around him. The final revelation. Japp ran a hand through his hair. If the real Philip Arkwright has been dead for years, then the man who was murdered at Clarendon Manor was a fraud. That means this whole inheritance scheme was built on a lie. Poirot nodded. Oui, Chief Inspector. The impostor's goal was simple. Convince Lord Clarendon he was his long-lost heir and secure the family fortune. But someone, perhaps Marcus Wren, discovered the deception and sought to expose him. Hastings frowned. So the murderer silenced Wren before he could talk. Precisely. Poirot gestured toward the coffin. And now we have the final proof. The real Philip Arkwright lies here, entombed for years. The impostor played his role well, but in the end, the truth has a way of rising from the shadows. Japp exhaled heavily. And now we need to figure out who was pulling the strings behind all this. Poirot's moustache twitched. Do not worry, Chief Inspector. The murderer has made one final mistake. Japp raised an eyebrow. Which is, Poirot smiled. They did not count on Hercule Poirot uncovering the truth. As the weight of the discovery settled over them, a sound echoed from above. Footsteps. Someone was in the chapel. Japp immediately raised his revolver. Stay here. I'll handle this. Poirot, however, remained calm. Non, Chief Inspector. Let us see who our visitor is. After all, I believe we are about to have a most interesting confrontation. The air grew tense as they turned toward the entrance. Off the crypt, a shadow loomed at the top of the stairs, and then a voice, cold and filled with menace. You should not have come here. Chapter 9. The Unmasked Deceiver. A tense silence hung in the crypt as the shadow at the entrance shifted, stepping forward into the dim lantern light. The voice had been unmistakably laced with menace. But now, as the figure revealed itself, the tension sharpened like the blade of a dagger. It was Lucian Graves, the family solicitor, always the picture of composure, now stood at the top of the ancient staircase, his usually impeccable suit slightly dishevelled. His cold, calculating gaze swept across the room, pausing on each of them, on Poirot, on Japp, on Hastings, and finally on the tomb of Philip Arkwright. Japp wasted no time. His revolver was already drawn, his voice like a whip-crack in the still air. "Don't move, Graves. Step forward, slowly." But Lucian Graves did not appear rattled. Instead, he descended the steps with a deliberate, almost casual elegance, his hands raised slightly in a mockery of surrender. "Really, Inspector? A gun? That seems unnecessary." Poirot stepped forward, his sharp eyes never leaving the solicitor. "Unnecessary, Monsieur Graves, but I think not. When a man arrives at the scene of a crime, uninvited and under suspicious circumstances, one must ask, what does he hope to hide?" A smirk flickered across Graves's lips. "Hide? Monsieur Poirot, if I wished to conceal anything, do you think I would have walked in so boldly?" Japp scoffed. "Spare us the lawyer's talk, Graves. You knew we'd find this tomb, didn't you?" Graves tilted his head, his gaze landing on the name Philip Arkwright, etched upon the stone lid. A sigh escaped him, almost as if he were relieved. "Yes," he admitted, "I knew." Hastings bristled. "Then why didn't you say anything before?" Graves's expression darkened, "Because it was not my secret to tell." Poirot's moustache twitched. "And yet, Monsieur Graves, you came here tonight, perhaps to remove any remaining evidence before we could uncover the truth." A flicker of something, anger, frustration, crossed Graves's face. "You assume too much, Poirot. I came here to confirm my own suspicions, to see whether my fears were correct." Japp sneered. "Your fears? What a load of nonsense! You knew the Philip Arkwright who returned wasn't the real one. You were part of the deception, weren't you?" Graves exhaled, shaking his head. "No, I suspected something was amiss, yes, but I was not the architect of this scheme. That belongs to someone else entirely." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Then tell us, who is behind it?" Graves's mouth opened, but before he could utter a word, there was a sharp crack, a gunshot. The sound echoed through the crypt. Graves jerked forward, clutching his chest, a strangled gasp escaping his lips before he collapsed to the ground. Japp spun toward the staircase, his gun raised. "Bloody hell! The shooter's up there!" A second shot rang out, striking the stone near Poirot's feet. The Belgian detective remained still, his expression unreadable, even as a bullet narrowly missed him. Hastings, meanwhile, yanked Evelyn Harcourt, behind cover, his heart pounding. The shooter was in the chapel above, hidden in the shadows. They had eliminated Graves before he could reveal the final truth. Japp bellowed, "We're sitting ducks down here." Poirot, however, remained eerily calm. He turned his sharp gaze toward the crypt's walls, studying, calculating, deducing. And then, ever so softly, he murmured, "We must force their hand." The decisive Trap Hastings watched as Poirot straightened his jacket and stepped into the open. "Poirot!" he hissed. "What are you doing?" But the detective merely adjusted his cuffs, as if he were preparing for an afternoon tea rather than facing a murderer. "Boo, my dear Hastings," he said, his voice perfectly composed. "This assassin has taken great pains to eliminate witnesses, but their mistake was in underestimating Hercule Poirot." Hastings thought his friend had gone mad. "For heaven's sake, get back!" But Poirot was not afraid. Instead, he turned his back to the staircase. An invitation. There was a moment of hesitation, a few beats of silence, and then the murderer took the bait. A third gunshot rang out. But this time Poirot was ready. He spun at the last moment, and in the same instant Japp fired towards the source of the attack. The shot struck stone, but it was enough. The figure in the shadows flinched, stumbled, and in that instant Poirot charged up the steps. A scuffle, a cry, a final thud, and then the murderer lay sprawled at the foot of the altar, disarmed. Hastings rushed forward, breathless, his heart hammering as he finally saw the face of the true villain. It was Margaret Clarendon, the elegant widow, always so poised, now lay on the cold chapel floor, her expression a twisted mix of rage and defeat. Her pistol lay just out of reach, her hands trembling as Japp seized her wrists. "You," Hastings breathed in disbelief. "You were behind it all." And Margaret let out a low, humourless chuckle. "Oh, Hastings, don't look so surprised. You should have known. Men always underestimate women." Poirot nodded, his expression almost sympathetic. "Indeed, madam. And yet in the end it was not your cunning that betrayed you. It was your fear." Japp scowled, securing the handcuffs around her wrists. "Start talking, Lady Clarendon. How long have you been planning this?" Margaret's lips curled into a smirk. "Planning? My dear Inspector, I was merely playing the game better than the rest of you." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "No, madam. You did not play the game better. You merely believed you had control over every piece. But the truth was always waiting in the shadows, ready to be uncovered." Hastings still looked stunned. But why? Why go through all this trouble? Margaret's smirk vanished. Her eyes hardened, and when she spoke, her voice was pure venom. "Because my husband was a fool. Because he gave away everything to a dead man. And because I was never going to let some impostor take what should have been mine." Japp's eyes narrowed. "So you knew the man claiming to be Philip Arkwright was a fraud?" Margaret nodded. "Of course. But I let him play his little game. I encouraged it. And then, when the moment was right, I killed him." Hastings recoiled. "And Wren? Graves? Did you kill them too?" Margaret exhaled, as if bored by the question. Marcus Wren got too close to the truth. Graves was a loose end. She tilted her head at Poirot. "But you, Poirot, were the only one I never had a tete plan for." Poirot gave a slight bow. "I am most flattered, madam." Japp hauled Margaret to her feet. "You're coming with us, Lady Clarendon. The game's over." Margaret let out one last bitter laugh. "Oh, Inspector, the game is never truly over." With that, she was led away. The final reflection as the dawn broke over Clarendon Manor. Hastings watched as Poirot stood on the terrace, gazing out over the grounds. "Another case solved," Hastings said, joining him. Poirot nodded. "Oui, but tell me, Hastings, what have we learned?" Hastings frowned. "That people will do anything for wealth?" Poirot chuckled. "Ah, but we already knew that, mon ami." "No. What we have learned is something much more interesting." He turned, his sharp eyes twinkling. "That even in a game of shadows, the truth will always find its way to the light." And with that, Hercule Poirot adjusted his cuffs, smoothed his moustache, and walked away, leaving another mystery solved in his wake. Chapter 10. The Final Curtain. The morning sun had just begun to rise over Clarendon Manor, when Hercule Poirot, having settled matters with Inspector Japp, finally allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The case had reached its inevitable conclusion. Lady Margaret Clarendon, in her desperate bid to control her late husband's fortune, had been unmasked as the orchestrator of the entire deception. And yet, Poirot was not entirely satisfied. Something still troubled him. Hastings, ever observant in his own way, took note of Poirot's pensive expression as they sat in the grand drawing-room, sipping their morning tea. "Poirot, you have that look on your face. The one that tells me the case is not quite as closed as we all believe." Poirot smiled faintly, but did not answer immediately. Instead, he set his teacup down with great precision, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle in his sleeve before finally speaking. "My dear Hastings, tell me, what is it that strikes you as most curious about this affair?" Hastings blinked. "Curious? Why, I should think the most curious thing is that Lady Clarendon very nearly got away with everything. If it hadn't been for your clever deductions, Poirot, she might have succeeded in her scheme." Poirot inclined, his head slightly. Oui, she was clever, perhaps even brilliant. But tell me, Hastings, does it not puzzle you that a woman as shrewd as Lady Clarendon, who manipulated an entire household, who arranged for Philip Arkwright's impostor to inherit everything, would make such an elementary mistake? Hastings frowned. "A mistake?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, mon ami, you have not yet seen it. But it is there, hidden beneath the surface, like a thread left untied in a perfectly tailored suit." Before Hastings could reply, Inspector Japp entered the room, looking uncharacteristically pleased. "Well, Poirot, I must say, we've got her good and proper this time. Lady Clarendon's confessed to everything, helping plant the impostor, killing Marcus Wren, and even finishing off Lucian Graves before he could talk." "Oui," Poirot murmured. "But what of the real Philip Arkwright?" Japp frowned. "What do you mean? We found his tomb, didn't we? The man's been dead for years." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Yes, so we were led to believe, but I ask you this. If Philip Arkwright perished so many years ago, why was Lady Clarendon still afraid?" Japp gave him a baffled look. "Afraid? She wasn't afraid. She was a woman on a power trip, that's all." Poirot merely shook his head. "Non, mon ami. She was afraid, terrified, in fact. Not of discovery, but of something else entirely." Hush settled over the room. Hastings felt a chill creep up his spine. "Poirot, what are you saying?" Poirot leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I am saying, Hastings, that the real Philip Arkwright is alive." "The ghost who walks," Japp scoffed. "That's impossible. We saw the tomb with our own eyes." Poirot nodded. "Yes, an empty tomb, mon cher Japp." Hastings's eyes widened. "Good heavens! But if Philip Arkwright is alive, then where on earth has he been all this time?" Poirot rose from his chair, walking to the grand window that overlooked the fog-laden estate. His gaze swept across the landscape before finally settling on the dense woods beyond the manor. "Hidden, my friends. He has been hidden." Japp's face darkened. "Are you saying someone helped him disappear?" Poirot turned back to face them, his expression unreadable. Or perhaps he disappeared by his own design. A heavy silence filled the room. But why? Hastings finally asked. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. Consider this, Hastings. If Philip Arkwright had died all those years ago, why would Lady Clarendon go through the trouble of arranging an impostor? Would it not have been easier to leave the estate in limbo, to challenge the will, or to seize control through other legal means? Japp scratched his head. I suppose. But then, what are you saying? That the impostor was meant to draw out the real Philip? Exactement, mon ami, Poirot exclaimed. Lady Clarendon was many things, but she was not foolish. She must have known that Philip Arkwright was alive. The impostor was merely a baited hook, cast into still waters. Hastings exhaled. Good Lord, and if that's true, then the real Philip might be somewhere close, watching everything unfold. Japp's expression turned grim. Or worse, maybe he's already made his move. Poirot turned, his sharp gaze falling on the estate grounds. Indeed, Japp, and that is precisely why I intend to find him, before it is too late. The final clue, the search began immediately. Poirot, Japp, and Hastings scoured the manor and its surrounding grounds, questioning servants, checking guest logs, and retracing every step that Philip Arkwright would have taken if he were still alive. The breakthrough came at midnight, when Poirot, standing alone in the family library, ran his fingers over an old, faded map of the estate. His eyes narrowed as they landed on a forgotten cottage, hidden deep within the woods. A place where someone could vanish. A place where someone could wait. Without hesitation, Poirot called for Japp and Hastings. We go now, he declared. Hastings hesitated. But Poirot, it's the dead of night. Shouldn't we wait until morning? Poirot's voice was firm. Non, mon ami. If Philip Arkwright truly lives, then he knows he has been exposed, and if that is the case, morning may be too late. The man who should be dead. The three men approached the cottage in the woods with great caution. The air was thick with tension, the only sounds the rustling leaves and their own cautious footsteps. Japp's revolver was drawn. Hastings's breath was shallow. Poirot, however, was calm. They reached the door. Poirot raised a gloved hand and knocked. Silence. Then a faint shuffle, a pause, and finally the creak of a door opening. A man stood before them, his face worn and aged, yet unmistakable. Philip Arkwright. Not a ghost, not an impostor, but the real Philip Arkwright, alive after all these years. Hastings took a step back, his mouth agape. Impossible! Japp was less poetic. Bloody hell! Poirot, however, merely smiled. Monsieur Arkwright, he said softly, it has been a long time, n'est-ce pas? Philip Arkwright sighed, running a weary hand through his hair. His voice, when he spoke, was hollow. You found me. Poirot nodded. Oui, monsieur. And now I believe it is time for the truth, final revelation and justice. Philip Arkwright's story was one of betrayal and survival. He had discovered years ago that his own wife, Lady Clarendon, had plotted to have him killed. Fearing for his life, he vanished, allowing the world to believe he was dead. For years he watched from the shadows as Margaret took control, manipulating his fortune and his name. But when the impostor appeared, Philip realized he could no longer remain silent. He had been planning to come forward, until Margaret struck first. Now, with his testimony, Margaret Clarendon would face the ultimate justice. The case was truly solved. The game of shadows had ended. And as the sun rose over Clarendon Manor, Hercule Poirot once more adjusted his cuffs, his moustache pristine, and walked away. Another mystery solved, another truth uncovered. Chapter 11. The Curtain Falls, the aftermath of the storm. A crisp autumn wind swept through the grand halls of Clarendon Manor, carrying with it the remnants of an era that had come crashing down. Lady Margaret Clarendon, once the mistress of deception, now sat behind bars at Scotland Yard, awaiting trial. Her confession had been thorough, and with Philip Arkwright's return from the shadows, there was no room for escape. Poirot, Hastings, and Japp stood together in the drawing-room one last time. Though the case had been solved, there was an unspoken tension in the air. Philip Arkwright, the man who had been presumed dead for nearly 2 decades, was free. But at what cost? Hastings sipped his tea thoughtfully. Well, Poirot, I must say, this case was a devilish tangle from start to finish. But there's one thing I still don't quite understand. Poirot arched a perfect eyebrow. Only one thing, mon ami? You flatter me, Japp chuckled. Come now, Poirot, let's hear the good captain out. What's on your mind, Hastings? Hastings leaned forward. Philip Arkwright allowed himself to be thought dead for years. But why did he choose now to come back? Surely he had opportunities before. Poirot tapped his fingers together, his expression unreadable. A most excellent question, Hastings, and to answer it, we must return to the heart of human nature. Japp folded his arms. Go on, then. Poirot gestured towards the fireplace, where the embers glowed dimly. Imagine, mes amis, that you are a man who has everything, wealth, power, security. Then, one day, you learn that the person closest to you, your own wife, has betrayed you, wishes to see you dead. What do? Hastings frowned. Well, I suppose I'd fight back, wouldn't I? Non, Poirot said, shaking his head. You would do what Philip Arkwright did. You would flee. Because, mon cher Hastings, the greatest fear is not death, but betrayal. It was not his life that Philip wished to preserve, but rather his sanity. Japp whistled. So you're saying he only came back because he knew Margaret was about to win? Poirot nodded. Exactement. When Philip heard about the impostor, he knew the game had reached its final move. Had he stayed silent, Margaret would have solidified her control. That was something he could not allow. Hastings sighed. I suppose it makes sense. But it's a rather tragic thing, isn't it? All these years of hiding, only to return to a home that no longer belongs to him. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, but you see, mon ami, Philip Arkwright has gained something far greater than an estate. He has regained his name. And in the end, a man's name is his greatest possession. Lady Clarendon's fate. News of Lady Clarendon's trial spread quickly through London society. A woman of her standing charged with murder, fraud, and conspiracy was a scandal that the newspapers relished. At the trial, her lawyers attempted to argue that she had been temporarily overcome with grief, and had merely wished to secure her late husband's legacy. Poirot, who attended the proceedings in pristine attire, merely shook his head at the absurdity. Hastings leaned over. "She doesn't look the same, does she?" Indeed, Lady Clarendon, once a vision of cold, untouchable grace, now looked gaunt and exhausted. The arrogance had drained from her face, leaving only the pale ghost of a woman who had gambled and lost. Philip Arkwright took the stand. His testimony was calm, precise. When asked why he had returned, he simply answered, "Because the truth deserved to be known." With Poirot's airtight deductions, the verdict was inevitable. Guilty. As Lady Clarendon was led away, she cast one final glance at Poirot, a look of resignation, and perhaps even admiration. For in the end, she had played a game against Hercule Poirot, and lost. Poirot's reflection. That evening, back in Poirot's cosy London apartment, Hastings poured himself a brandy, while Poirot carefully adjusted the symmetry of his desk. "Ornaments. You know, Poirot," Hastings mused, "this case had all the makings of a grand novel. A missing heir, a clever impostor, a devious murderess. It was quite the adventure." Poirot, still adjusting the position of a silver paperweight, replied, "Oui, Hastings, but do not forget, in novels everything is tied up neatly. In life there are always loose threads." Hastings frowned. "Loose threads? What do you mean?" Poirot finally looked up, his eyes sharp. "Consider, mon ami, where did Margaret Clarendon find her impostor? Who was he, truly?" Hastings blinked. "Well, she must have hired him, mustn't she?" Poirot sighed. "Ah, Hastings, ever so trusting. A woman like Margaret Clarendon would not entrust such a scheme to just anyone. Non, non, non. This man, this impostor, was carefully chosen. And yet we know almost nothing about him." Japp, who had joined them after the trial, exhaled. "You're not telling me there's another twist, Poirot? My head's already spinning." Poirot chuckled. "Non, mon cher Japp, the case is closed, but I simply wonder, what became of the impostor's real identity? Who was he before Margaret found him?" Japp shrugged. "Does it matter? He's dead now." Poirot tapped his temple. "Ah, but you see, my little grey cells are never content with half of a puzzle." Hastings sighed. "Poirot, you truly are insatiable. Can't you let one case rest without seeking another?" Poirot's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Perhaps, Hastings. Perhaps." The three men sat in companionable silence, watching the fire crackle in the hearth. The case had been solved. The culprit had been caught. And yet Poirot's mind, ever restless, continued to turn. For where one mystery ended, another always began. A final thought. As Poirot rose to retire for the evening, he straightened his cuffs and turned to Hastings with a mischievous glint in his eye. "My dear Hastings, do remind me, what are your plans for the next few weeks?" Hastings raised a brow. "Nothing particularly pressing. Why?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, in that case, I do believe an intriguing letter arrived for me this morning, from an old acquaintance in the south of France. It appears there is another little problem that requires my attention." Japp groaned. "Good Lord, man, do you ever stop?" Poirot merely smiled. "Non, mon ami, not when there is still work to be done." And with that, Hercule Poirot, the greatest detective of them all, bid his companions good night, ready, as always, for the next mystery to unfold. Chapter 12. The Shadow That Remains. A letter from the past. It was a week after Lady Clarendon's conviction when Hastings found Poirot in an unusually contemplative mood. The great detective sat at his desk, his hands folded, his gaze fixed on a single piece of aged parchment before him. "Poirot, old chap, what's got you looking so grave?" Hastings asked, setting his hat down. Poirot sighed, tapping a delicate finger against the page. "Mon ami, this case, it is closed, yes?" "Yes, of course. Margaret Clarendon is in prison. Philip Arkwright has reclaimed his name. You exposed the impostor's deception. All is well." Poirot exhaled. "And yet, Hastings, there is something that continues to trouble me. Tell me, what do you make of this letter?" Hastings picked it up, frowning as he read. "Monsieur Poirot, you do not know me, but I know you. I know that you value the truth above all else. There is more to Clarendon Manor than you were permitted to see, more to the past than even the accused dared to admit. If you truly wish to understand the depths of the deception, come to Brighton. Meet me at the clock tower at precisely midnight. You will not regret it. But come alone." Hastings's eyebrows shot up. "Good heavens, Poirot! What on earth does this mean?" Poirot leaned back in his chair. "That, mon ami, is the question, is it not?" Japp, who had arrived just in time to hear the exchange, scoffed. "Oh, come on, Poirot. You've just solved a perfectly good case. What's all this nonsense about unfinished business?" Poirot steepled his fingers. "Japp, in your line of work, how often do criminals tell the full truth?" Japp scratched his chin. "Well, never, I suppose." "Exactement. And that is why I must go." Hastings frowned. "Poirot, you're not seriously considering heading to Brighton alone in the dead of night?" Poirot smiled mysteriously. "But of course, mon ami. When a shadow lingers after the curtain has fallen, one must ask, who cast it?" The midnight meeting. The night air was crisp as Poirot arrived at the Brighton clock tower, his silhouette small against the looming structure. The streets were deserted except for the occasional distant hum of an automobile. Standing beneath the glow of a flickering street lamp, Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "Now, let us see if our mystery guest appears." A soft footstep echoed behind him. Poirot turned. A woman stood in the shadows. Her face was obscured by a heavy veil, but Poirot recognized something. The graceful poise of aristocracy, the deliberate stillness of someone accustomed to keeping secrets. "You came," she whispered. "Oui, madame. But who are you?" The woman hesitated, then she lifted her veil. Poirot's eyes widened. Mon Dieu! A twist that changes everything. Hastings paced nervously in Poirot's apartment the following morning. The detective had returned from Brighton at dawn, silent and unreadable. He had barely touched his breakfast, an unthinkable thing for Poirot. Finally, Hastings could bear it no longer. "Poirot, for heaven's sake, what happened?" Poirot sat down, his teacup, and looked Hastings straight in the eye. "Lady Clarendon," he said. Hastings nearly dropped his own cup. But she's in prison." Poirot nodded. "Oui. And yet, Hastings, the woman I met last night, she was Margaret Clarendon." Hastings paled. Then who is the woman they arrested?" Poirot's moustache twitched. Ah, mon ami, that is the question, is it not? The room fell into stunned silence. Somewhere in the distance a clock chimed, and once again Hercule Poirot found himself on the brink of another impossible mystery. Chapter 13. The Woman in the Shadows. The shock of the impossible. Hercule Poirot sat in his armchair, fingers lightly drumming against the armrest. Across from him, Captain Hastings shifted uneasily, his cup of tea forgotten on the table. "Poirot, I don't understand," Hastings finally said. "Lady Clarendon is locked up in Holloway Prison, awaiting trial. But last night you say you met her." Poirot gave a slow nod. "Oui, mon ami. It is, as you say, impossible. And yet I, Hercule Poirot, saw her with my own eyes." Hastings frowned. "A twin, perhaps?" Poirot sighed. "It is the logical assumption. But logic, mon ami, does not always lead to the truth. Consider, if Lady Clarendon had a twin, why would this twin reveal herself now? What purpose would such an elaborate deception serve?" Before Hastings could reply, a sharp knock interrupted them. Inspector Japp strode in, his coat still damp from the morning mist. He carried a file, which he slapped onto Poirot's desk with an air of finality. "Here," Japp said. "That's Lady Margaret Clarendon's prison record. I checked myself this morning. She's been behind bars for a full week. No visitors except her solicitor." Poirot took the file and flipped it open. His keen eyes scanned the official reports, confirming the details of Lady Clarendon's arrest, her intake, and her daily routine in Holloway Prison. Japp folded his arms. "So, unless she's got supernatural powers, you didn't meet her last night, Poirot?" "Non, Japp," Poirot said quietly, closing the file. "I did meet Lady Clarendon." Japp groaned. "Oh, for heaven's sake! Then who in blazes is the woman in prison?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A most excellent question, mon cher Japp." 2. The visit to Holloway, prison determined to settle the matter once and for all. Poirot and Hastings travelled to Holloway Prison later that afternoon. The prison warden, a tall, unsmiling woman named Matron Abernathy, led them through the stone corridors with a rhythmic click of keys against her belt. "You'll have 5 minutes," she said. "She's been quiet since her arrest. Barely speaks. A word." Poirot nodded. "That is most interesting." As they entered the dimly lit visiting room, Hastings felt an uneasy chill settle over him. The woman seated at the table was Lady Margaret Clarendon, beyond any doubt. The same aristocratic posture, the same delicate hands. But something was off. She lifted her eyes and gazed at Poirot with an unnerving stillness. "Lady Clarendon," Poirot said gently. "Tell me, who are you?" A slow smile curled on the woman's lips. "Who do you think I am, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "I think, madame, that you are playing a very dangerous game." The woman chuckled. "And if I am, what does it matter? The trial is set. The sentence will come. And then it will be over. Will it?" Poirot leaned forward. "If you are truly Margaret Clarendon, then why did I meet your double last night?" For the first time, the woman's composure faltered. Her fingers tightened against the tabletop. "Who did you meet?" she whispered. Poirot did not answer. Instead, he watched her face closely. A flicker of emotion, fear, recognition, then, just as quickly she composed herself once more. Go home, Monsieur Poirot, she said. The case is closed. Poirot rose from his chair, his expression unreadable. Ah, but you see, madame, the case is never closed until Hercule Poirot says it is. As he and Hastings left, Matron Abernathy glanced over her shoulder at the woman in the cell. Strange thing, isn't it? What is? Poirot asked. The matron sighed. I've been doing this job a long time, and I tell you, something about that woman doesn't sit right, like she's wearing a mask. Poirot gave a small smile. Indeed, madam, and masks, they are meant to be removed. The truth hidden in plain sight. That evening, Poirot sat at his desk, deep in thought. Hastings, pacing, finally exploded. Poirot, this is absurd. How can the same woman be in two places at once? Poirot sighed. Mon ami, you still see this case as two identical women. That is your error. Instead, ask yourself this. What if there is only one Lady Clarendon? Hastings blinked. But that would mean the woman in prison is an impostor. Poirot nodded. Exactement. Hastings shook his head. But why? Why would someone take her place? Poirot's gaze sharpened. To protect the real Lady Clarendon, of course. A chill ran down Hastings's spine. But protect her from what? Poirot's voice dropped to a near whisper. From the real murderer, Hastings. Hastings gasped. Then we've been looking at this all wrong. If the true Lady Clarendon is still free. Poirot smiled grimly. Then the true killer remains at large, mon ami. And they will not stop until all loose ends are tied. A shadow passed over the street outside. Poirot turned toward the window, his sharp instincts tingling. We must act quickly, Hastings, he murmured, before it is too late. Chapter 14. The Game of Shadows. A silent watcher in the dark. The dim glow of street lamps flickered against the damp cobblestones of Whitehall as Poirot and Hastings arrived back at their lodgings. The evening air carried a sharp bite, but something more sinister lingered, a sense of being watched. Poirot paused. At the doorstep, his keen eyes scanning the street. The houses stood still, their windows shuttered, yet his instincts whispered otherwise. "Do you feel it, Hastings?" he murmured. Hastings, slightly exasperated, adjusted his scarf. "Feel what, Poirot? I feel cold, I feel tired, and I feel quite ready for a hot drink." Poirot's gaze lingered on a shadowed figure in the distance. As soon as he looked, the figure disappeared into an alleyway. He turned to Hastings, his expression grave. "We are being observed, mon ami." Hastings frowned. "Are you sure? Could just be someone passing by." Poirot tapped his temple. "No. When one commits to deception as deeply as our unknown adversary, they do not leave matters to chance. Someone watches, and I intend to find out why." They entered the warmth of their flat, but Poirot did not remove his coat. He crossed to the writing desk, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and wrote a single sentence. "The game is in motion. Who will make the next move?" Poirot folded the note and placed it on the mantelpiece, his fingers tapping lightly against his lips. Dix, puzzled, asked, "What are you doing, Poirot?" "Ah, mon cher Hastings, the art of detection is sometimes like a game of chess. One does not always chase the enemy. Sometimes one lays a trap and waits for them to step forward. A midnight visitor, the trap was set. Poirot sat by the fire, seemingly relaxed, but his mind remained razor-sharp. Hastings, now dozing in his chair, was jolted awake by a soft knock at the door. Poirot's eyes flickered with interest. Ah, right on time. He rose and opened the door. A woman stood there, dressed in a heavy cloak, her face shadowed by the hood. "Come in, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, stepping aside. She hesitated before entering, removing her hood to reveal a face identical to Lady Margaret Clarendon. Hastings gasped. "My word, you're her, but you're in prison!" The woman sat in the chair Poirot offered, her hands trembling slightly. "No, Captain Hastings, I am not in prison." Poirot's sharp eyes studied her. "Then tell me, mademoiselle, who is—" The woman swallowed hard. "My sister." Hastings blurted out, "Then you do have a twin." She shook her head. "Not a twin. My cousin, Charlotte. We were raised together, nearly identical in appearance, and she took my place." Poirot folded his hands. "Why?" A long silence stretched between them. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Because I begged her to." A sister's sacrifice. The room was still save for the crackling fire. Hastings stared at the woman in astonishment. "Let me get this straight," he said. "You, Lady Margaret, were supposed to be arrested, but instead your cousin took your place, willingly." She nodded, her gaze downcast. "Charlotte has always been the stronger of us. When the police came for me, she saw the fear in my eyes, and she made the decision before I could stop her." Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "And why, Lady Clarendon, did you need to be arrested?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Because I did something terrible." Hastings stiffened. "Good heavens! What did you do?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I was at Windermere Hall the night Sir Hugo was murdered. I had gone to confront him about something terrible he had done. But when I arrived, he was already dead." Poirot's voice was almost hypnotic. "And yet, instead of going to the authorities, you fled. Why?" She buried her face in her hands. "Because I knew they would blame me. I was his only living relative. I had reason to hate him. I had threatened him in public. There was no hope for me." Poirot remained still. Then he asked, "What did Sir Hugo do that made you seek him out that night?" She raised her eyes, filled with anguish. "He ruined Charlotte's life." For the sinister truth, Hastings frowned. "What do you mean?" Lady Clarendon took a deep breath. "Charlotte. She was supposed to marry Lord Edwin Harcourt. They were deeply in love. But Sir Hugo despised Edwin. He arranged to have Charlotte disgraced, spread horrible lies about her. Edwin broke the engagement. She lost everything." Poirot's voice was quiet. "And that is why you confronted him?" She nodded. "I went to his study at Windermere Hall, but when I arrived, he was already dead. I panicked. I knew I would be accused, so I ran. And Charlotte, she protected me, as she always had." Poirot's fingers tapped lightly against the chair. "Lady Clarendon, did you see anyone else that night?" She hesitated. "There was one thing. As I fled, I heard the chime of a clock and a whisper in the darkness." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A whisper? What did it say?" She closed her eyes, trying to remember. Then Her voice trembling, she said, "The game is not yet over." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Fascinating." Hastings shivered. "Poirot, what does this mean?" Poirot rose abruptly. "It means, mon cher Hastings, that the true murderer is still at large, and they are playing a most dangerous game. The final gambit. Lady Clarendon grasped Poirot's arm. "You must help me. Charlotte will hang for a crime she didn't commit." Poirot gave a small nod. "Do not worry, madam. I, Hercule Poirot, shall ensure that justice is served. But we must act swiftly." He turned to Hastings. "Tomorrow we visit Windermere Hall. The answers lie within those walls." Hastings paled. "Back to the murder scene. But it's been closed off for weeks." Poirot smiled. "Ah, Hastings, but I suspect our killer has returned there as well." He glanced at the window, where the faintest movement of a shadow flickered in. The street below, Poirot's voice was barely above a whisper. "The game is nearing its end, and I intend to win." Chapter 15. The Gathering Storm. Return to Windermere Hall. The journey to Windermere Hall was made in solemn silence. Poirot, Hastings, and Lady Clarendon travelled by carriage, the frost-laced fields of the English countryside stretching endlessly before them. The air was thick with tension, an unspoken dread clinging to their thoughts. Hastings glanced at Poirot, who sat perfectly still, hands folded neatly atop his cane. "Poirot, do you truly believe the killer has returned to Windermere Hall?" Poirot's lips curved slightly. "It is not a matter of belief, mon ami, but of logic. A murderer does not simply vanish into the night. No, he lingers in the shadows, ensuring his secrets remain buried. And where better to guard them than at the very scene of the crime?" Lady Clarendon shivered, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders. "I haven't stepped foot in Windermere Hall since that night. The very thought chills me." Poirot inclined his head. "And yet, madame, it is precisely that night which holds the key to all our questions." The carriage rumbled up the winding path, and soon the grand estate loomed before them, dark and foreboding beneath the overcast sky. Its towering silhouette seemed to whisper of secrets long kept. As they stepped out onto the gravel drive, Poirot adjusted his gloves and cast a sharp glance at the windows. "Let us see, Hastings, if Windermere Hall will speak to us today." The silent house. The great doors groaned as they pushed open, revealing the cold, dust-laden interior of the manor. Time had left its mark. The furniture, once gleaming with polish, now stood in neglect. The air smelled of damp wood and forgotten things. Lady Clarendon hesitated in the doorway. "Everything is exactly as it was." Poirot stepped forward, his patent leather shoes making no sound against the marble floor. His eyes swept the grand entrance hall with precise calculation. "Then let us retrace the night, mes amis." They moved towards Sir Hugo's study, the room where death had struck. Poirot placed a gloved hand on the doorknob and turned it slowly. The door creaked open. The study remained frozen in time. Papers were still strewn across the desk. An overturned glass of brandy marked the last moments of the victim. And there, by the grand fireplace, was the stain on the rug, darkened by time. Lady Clarendon inhaled sharply. "I see it now, as if it were yesterday. Poirot walked the length of the room, his fingers brushing over objects, his keen mind piecing together the puzzle. "Tell me, madam," he said at last. "You arrived that night to confront Sir Hugo. At what time?" She swallowed. "It was shortly past 10 o'clock. And when you entered, was the window open?" She frowned. "Yes, the curtains were moving with the breeze." Poirot nodded, his moustache twitching. "Hastings, what do we know about windows left open in the dead of night?" Hastings blinked. "That someone may have entered or left through them." "Exactement." Poirot approached the window and inspected the frame. "And yet, if someone had entered, there should be footprints upon the carpet, non?" Hastings frowned. "There were none?" Poirot straightened. "None at all, which means the murderer was already inside the house before Sir Hugo ever opened that window." Lady Clarendon gasped. "Then it must have been one of the household." Poirot nodded. "Oui, and now we must determine which one." 3. The footsteps in the hall. If in answer, a sound echoed through the empty corridors, a soft creak of a floorboard. Lady Clarendon clutched the edge of the desk. "We're not alone." Poirot held up a hand for silence, listening intently. Another soft step. Someone was moving above them. "Come, Hastings," Poirot whispered. "Let us see who else walks Windermere Hall." They ascended the grand staircase, the balustrade cold beneath their hands. Poirot moved with precision, his feet making barely a sound. Hastings, less graceful, winced as a step groaned beneath him. Poirot stopped outside a partially open door, the light inside flickering like candlelight. Slowly he pushed the door open. Inside, a figure stood by the fireplace. A tall man, draped in a heavy overcoat, his back to them. Poirot spoke softly. "Bonsoir, monsieur. Might I ask what brings you to Windermere Hall at this late hour?" The man turned. Hastings sucked in a breath. "Lord Edwin Harcourt!" Lady Clarendon's voice was barely above a whisper. "Edwin?" The man stepped forward, his face weary, his eyes shadowed. "Margaret! My God, it really is you!" Poirot folded his arms. "I should be very interested, Lord Harcourt, to learn why you are here." Harcourt sighed. "I came for the same reason you did, Poirot. To uncover the truth about that night." Poirot's eyes glittered. "Then perhaps, monsieur, you will tell us what you really saw the night Sir Hugo was murdered." "Oh." The last witness. Harcourt hesitated. I shouldn't have been here that night, but I was. I arrived shortly after 10, hoping to speak with Charlotte. I saw her from the garden, standing by the window of this very room." Lady Clarendon's voice trembled. "Charlotte was here?" He nodded. "I called to her, but she turned away. Then I saw a man enter Sir Hugo's study." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "A man, you say? Describe him." Harcourt exhaled slowly. "I didn't see his face clearly, but I remember one thing. He was wearing Sir Hugo's robe." A deep silence filled the room. Lady Clarendon whispered, Then Sir Hugo wasn't alone. Someone was already inside, impersonating him." Poirot clapped his hands together. "And that, mes amis, is our missing piece." Hastings frowned. "I don't understand, Poirot." Poirot smiled. "Mon cher Hastings, think. If someone was wearing Sir Hugo's robe, It means they wished to be mistaken, for him. And what does that suggest? Lady Clarendon's eyes widened. That Sir Hugo wasn't the real target that night. Poirot nodded. Precisely. The killer did not intend to murder Sir Hugo. They intended to kill the person wearing his robe. Harcourt's face darkened. Then that means... A loud crash shattered the silence. Someone was downstairs. The trap closes. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Come, mes amis, the culprit grows desperate. They rushed down the stairs, the echo of their footsteps ringing through the hall. At the study door, Poirot flung it open. A figure in black was rifling through Sir Hugo's desk. The person whirled at the intrusion, their face twisting in panic. Lord Miles Redford, Poirot said coolly. I believe we have finally found our murderer. Hastings gasped. Redford! But he was Sir Hugo's closest friend. Poirot stepped forward. Were they truly friends, Hastings? Or was Redford the intended victim all along? Redford's face contorted. You don't understand. I had no choice. Poirot raised a hand. Non, monsieur. You had a choice, and you chose murder. Lady Clarendon's voice wavered. But why? Why would you kill Sir Hugo? Poirot's voice was calm, steady. Because Redford knew a terrible secret. A secret worth killing for. Redford backed away, his hands trembling. You don't know anything, Poirot? Poirot smiled. On the contrary, monsieur, I know everything. And with that, the final game began. Chapter 16. Poirot's Final Gambit. The Webb Titan's Lord, Miles Redford, stood frozen in place, his face ashen under the dim glow of the flickering study lamp. The tension in the room was thick, suffocating. Hastings watched, his heart hammering against his ribs, as Poirot calmly adjusted the cuffs of his neatly pressed jacket. Poirot's voice was a quiet storm, his words carrying the weight of finality. Monsieur, Redford, it is over. There is nowhere left to run. Redford took a shuddering breath, eyes darting wildly around the room, as though calculating his chances of escape. But Poirot had positioned himself strategically, blocking the only exit. Hastings knew from experience. Once Poirot had set his sights on a culprit, there was no escaping his grasp. Lady Clarendon's voice was barely above a whisper. Why, Miles? Why did you do it? Redford swallowed hard. You don't understand, he muttered. I had no choice. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Ah, non, monsieur, there is always a choice. But tell me, was it truly Sir Hugo you wished to kill that night? Or did you intend to murder another man entirely? A murmur of shock passed between Lady Clarendon and Lord Edwin Harcourt. Hastings frowned, his mind racing. But Poirot, he said, Sir Hugo was the one who was killed. Poirot nodded. Yes, mon cher Hastings, but recall Lord Harcourt's testimony. He saw a man in Sir Hugo's robe enter this very study. What does that tell us? Lady Clarendon gasped. That the man wearing the robe wasn't Sir Hugo at all. Poirot smiled. Exactement, madame. A terrible silence fell over the room. Lord Miles Redford let out a hollow laugh. It doesn't matter, he whispered. It's too late now. Poirot stepped forward, his voice growing cold. Non, monsieur, it matters very much, because you did not plan to kill Sir Hugo. You planned to kill the man who had borrowed his robe. The target revealed Hastings struggled to keep up. But who? Who was wearing the robe? Poirot turned to Lord Harcourt. "Monsieur, I must trouble you for the details of what you saw once more." Harcourt's face was pale. I told you. I saw the man in the robe enter the study from the garden. I assumed it was Sir Hugo." Poirot nodded. "Oui, but was it truly Hugo?" Harcourt hesitated, then shook his head. I can't say. It was dark, and I only saw the robe." Poirot turned back to Redford. "Tell me, monsieur, did you fire before confirming the man's identity?" Ferd's hands trembled. I didn't think. I saw the robe. I assumed it was him." Poirot's moustache twitched. But it was not him, was it? Lady Clarendon's hand flew to her mouth. Then Miles wasn't trying to kill Sir Hugo at all. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "No, madame. He was trying to kill you, Lord Harcourt." The room erupted in stunned silence. Harcourt staggered back a step. "Me? But why?" Redford's face twisted with something between rage and despair. "Because you weren't supposed to be here," he burst out. "You weren't supposed to come back." Poirot exhaled slowly. Now we understand." The hidden motive Hastings frowned. "But I still don't see the connection, Poirot. Why would Redford want Harcourt dead?" Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, pacing the length of the study. "For that, Hastings, we must go further into the past, to the true secret buried in Windermere Hall." He turned sharply to Redford. "Tell me, monsieur, how long had you known Sir Hugo?" Redford's eyes darted between them. "All my life," he admitted. "We were practically brothers." Poirot nodded. "And yet you feared something from his past coming to light. Something tied to Lord Harcourt's return." Redford's fists clenched. I don't know what you're talking about." Poirot smiled faintly. Monsieur, but you do, and I shall tell you. The truth is simple." He turned to Lady Clarendon. "Madame, you once said Sir Hugo harboured a terrible guilt. A guilt so deep he feared it would destroy everything. Tell me, what was his greatest regret?" Lady Clarendon's lips trembled. He never spoke of it, but I always believed it had to do with—" She stopped short, her face draining of colour. Poirot nodded. "With the death of his twin brother, Lord Henry Harcourt." Hastings felt the breath leave his body. Redford let out a strangled curse. "Stop it, Poirot! Just stop!" But Poirot pressed on. Sir Hugo was responsible, was he not, for his twin's death? Lady Clarendon's eyes filled with unshed tears. "I always suspected, but I never knew." Poirot's voice was gentle now. "And you, Redford, you knew the truth. You alone. And when you learned that Lord Edwin Harcourt was returning, you feared he might uncover it." Redford's body shook with rage. "Hugo wasn't a murderer," he spat. "It was an accident. But if anyone had found out, if it had come to light, everything we built would have crumbled." Poirot's gaze hardened. "And so you decided to eliminate Lord Edwin Harcourt before he could expose the past?" Redford said nothing. His silence was answer enough. The final reckoning, Poirot sighed, shaking his head. "And so that fateful night, you waited in the shadows. You saw the figure in Sir Hugo's robe, and without hesitation you fired." Redford's breath was ragged, and it wasn't him. Poirot nodded. No, monsieur, it was Sir Hugo's valet, who had borrowed the robe that evening. A terrible silence followed. Redford's voice was hollow. I killed my own friend by mistake. Poirot's gaze was unyielding. A tragic irony, n'est-ce pas? In your attempt to silence the past, you only ensured its revelation. Hastings swallowed hard. So, that's it then. Redford murdered Sir Hugo thinking he was Harcourt. Redford let out a bitter laugh. And all for nothing. Poirot stepped forward. It is over, monsieur. The game is finished. For a long moment, Redford stood in silence. Then, with a slow, resigned nod, he exhaled and dropped his head. Lady Clarendon turned away, unable to look at him. Lord Harcourt closed his eyes. Outside, the first rays of dawn crept through the windows, illuminating Windermere Hall with a pale golden light. Poirot took a deep breath. Come, Hastings, there is nothing more for us here. As they stepped into the cold morning air, Hastings turned to Poirot. You know, old chap, I sometimes wonder if you ever grow tired of solving mysteries. Poirot smiled, his moustache twitching. Ah, mon ami, there will always be another mystery. But for today, justice has been served. And with that, the great detective walked away, leaving Windermere Hall and its secrets behind. Chapter 17. The curtain falls. The case was closed. The guilty party had been unmasked, and justice had been served. Yet, for Hercule Poirot, there was still one final act left in the grand performance. The reckoning with the deeper truths behind human nature. A final meeting at Whitehaven Mansions. It was a crisp morning when Poirot and Hastings found themselves back in Poirot's meticulously ordered apartment at Whitehaven Mansions. The familiar scent of freshly polished furniture and the subtle tang of lemon oil filled the air. Poirot sat in his favourite chair, his hands resting lightly on the arms, his moustache groomed to perfection. Hastings, on the other hand, paced near the window, his mind still restless. Poirot, I can't quite shake the feeling that something about this case was different, more intricate, more layered than usual. Poirot's lips curled slightly. You perceive correctly, mon ami. This was no ordinary crime of passion or greed. This was a crime woven in deception so delicate that even the criminals themselves nearly believed their own lies. Hastings turned, his curiosity piqued. What do you mean? Poirot steepled his fingers. Tell me, Hastings, what do you believe was the true motive? Hastings frowned, considering the tangled web of clues. Revenge? Money? Jealousy? It seemed to be a mixture of all three. Poirot shook his head. Non, Hastings, it was fear. Fear? Oui. Fear that the past would resurface, that secrets long buried would be exhumed. The guilty acted not out of malice, but out of desperation, to preserve the illusion they had so carefully constructed. Hastings exhaled slowly. And yet, despite all their efforts, they couldn't fool you. Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The truth, mon cher, is like the little grain of sand in one's shoe. It cannot be ignored forever. A visit from Inspector Japper Sharpknock at the door interrupted their conversation. Poirot straightened his cuffs before calling out, "Entrez!" Inspector Japp stepped inside, his expression a curious mix of admiration and exasperation. "You know, Poirot, one of these days you'll solve a case without making me look like a fool." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, but mon ami, what is a performance without an audience?" Japp rolled his eyes. "Well, the Yard is tying up loose ends. The official report will be wrapped up soon. I just wanted to drop by and ask, what gave them away?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, mon cher Japp, it was the contradiction. People lie with words, but they betray themselves in action. The moment our culprit hesitated at the mention of the twins' name, just for the briefest second, I knew." Japp let out a low whistle. "I'll never understand how you do it." Poirot smoothed his moustache. "It is simple, mon ami. One must merely use the little grey cells." A philosophical end after Japp had left, Poirot turned to Hastings with a reflective expression. "You see, Hastings, in every case there is always a moment where the truth is inevitable. It waits in the shadows, patient until it steps into the light." Hastings nodded, and yet, no matter how many cases you solve, people will continue to deceive, won't they? Poirot sighed, his gaze distant. "Oui, Hastings. The world is full of masks. Some are worn for protection, others for deception. But the greatest illusion of all is that the truth can remain hidden forever." He stood adjusting his lapels. "And now, mon ami, I believe it is time for a well-earned rest. A new case will come soon enough, but until then, order, symmetry, and a perfectly made tisane." Hastings chuckled. "No adventure, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, but Hastings, life itself is an adventure, is it not?" With that, the great detective turned toward the window, watching as the city moved below. One mystery solved, but 1,000 more still waiting in the wings. Chapter 18. The Whispering Widow. A Letter from the Past. The rain drummed against the windows of Whitehaven mansions, casting shimmering rivulets down the glass. Hercule Poirot sat at his breakfast table, a perfectly arranged plate of toast and eggs before him, untouched. He was reading a letter, one that had arrived that morning, its envelope yellowed with age, its contents unsettling. Hastings, seated across from him, watched with curiosity. "A letter from an admirer, Poirot?" Poirot shook his head, his expression grave. "No, Hastings. This is a letter written 20 years ago, but only delivered today." Hastings frowned. 20 years? How is that possible?" Poirot carefully folded the letter and tapped a finger against it. "It is signed by a woman long believed to be dead." Hastings nearly dropped his coffee cup. "Dead? But how?" Poirot raised a finger. "Ah, you will read it for yourself." Hastings took the letter, his eyes scanning the elegant, sloping script. "Monsieur Poirot, by the time you read this, I shall be gone. But know this, my death is a deception, and the one who sought to silence me walks free. I fear the truth will be buried with me, but you, only you, can uncover it. Seek the widow who does not weep, and listen well to the whispers of the past. They will tell you who killed me. Geneviève Armand." Hastings blinked. "Poirot, this is incredible. Who is Geneviève Armand?" Poirot's gaze darkened. "She was once known as La Belle Fantôme, the beautiful ghost. A Parisian socialite who vanished without a trace 20 years ago." Hastings leaned forward. And you believe she was murdered? Poirot placed a finger on the letter. She believed so, mon ami. And if this letter has only now found its way to me, it means someone does not wish for the past to be unearthed. Oh, that moment, a knock at the door interrupted them. Poirot stood, adjusting his cuffs before opening it. A woman stood in the hallway, a widow draped in black, her face hidden beneath a heavy veil. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "I have been waiting for you for 20 years." The widow's tale. The mysterious widow sat in Poirot's armchair, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. Hastings observed her closely, trying to glimpse her face beneath the veil. But she kept her head low. Poirot, ever meticulous, offered her a cup of tisane. "Madame, you have come at an unusual hour. Tell me, why now?" The woman hesitated before speaking. "Because the man who silenced Geneviève has died. And with his death, the secrets he guarded are beginning to slip free." Poirot's moustache twitched. And who precisely was this man? The widow lifted her head slightly. "My husband." Hastings exhaled sharply. "Then you mean he was the murderer?" She shook her head. "No, but he knew the one who was. He was there that night when Geneviève disappeared." Poirot studied her carefully. "And what is it that you truly wish to tell me, madam?" The widow's voice trembled. "I have something that belonged to Geneviève, a diary. It names the people she feared. It is why my husband kept me silent for so long. But now I must know the truth." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then let us uncover it together." 3. A name from the shadows that evening. Poirot and Hastings sat in the dim glow of the study lamp. The widow's diary opened before them. The pages were delicate, the ink faded, but the words carried weight. Geneviève had written of whispers in the corridors, of meetings held in secret, of a growing dread that someone close to her wished her gone. But one entry, dated mere days before her disappearance, stood out. "He watches me always. He smiles, but there is something in his eyes that chills me. I fear he has learned what I know, and if he has, I shall not live to see the truth exposed." The name beneath it was scrawled hastily, as if written in a moment of panic. Lucien Duval, Hastings, sat back. Lucien Duval? Who the devil is he? Poirot tapped the name thoughtfully. "A question we must answer, mon ami, and I suspect we shall find our answers in Paris." Hastings groaned. "More boats, Poirot?" Poirot smiled. "But, of course, the past is calling, Hastings, and we must answer." 4. The mystery deepens. 3 days later, Poirot and Hastings arrived in Paris, the city glimmering beneath the evening lights. Poirot wasted no time, and led them to a grand but fading estate on the outskirts of the city, the last known residence of Lucien Duval. They were met at the door by a sharp-eyed butler, who regarded them warily. "Monsieur Duval does not receive visitors." Poirot's smile was polite but firm. "Ah, but he shall receive Hercule Poirot." The name had its effect. The butler hesitated before leading them into a dimly lit drawing-room. Heavy drapes blocked the outside light, and the air smelled faintly of cigar smoke and old books. An elderly man sat in an armchair, his fingers drumming lightly against the armrest. His sharp, hawk-like eyes studied Poirot with an unreadable expression. "You have come for ghosts, Monsieur Poirot," he said at last, "but ghosts should remain buried." Poirot took a seat across from him. "Alas, Monsieur Duval, ghosts are most persistent, and Geneviève Armand has whispered from the grave." Lucien Duval's fingers tensed. Poirot continued, his voice light but unyielding. "You knew her well, did you not?" A muscle in Duval's jaw twitched. "I knew of her. A scandalous woman. She disappeared, and the world moved on." Poirot leaned forward. Did it, or was it made to? For the first time Duval hesitated. Poirot pressed on. "You were there, the night she vanished. You saw what happened." The silence stretched. Then Duval exhaled slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw more than that, Monsieur Poirot. I saw who killed her." Hastings sat up. "Then why did you stay silent?" Duval's gaze darkened. "Because I knew that if I spoke, I would be next." Poirot tilted his head. "And now?" A flicker of fear crossed the old man's face. "Now," he murmured, "I wonder if I have already waited too long." At that moment the lights flickered. A shadow moved near the door. Hastings turned sharply. A gunshot rang out. Lucien Duval slumped forward. Poirot leapt to his feet, but it was too late. The man who held the final secret had just taken it to his grave. The next chapter begins as the echoes of the gunshot faded. Poirot stood motionless, his mind already working. Hastings checked Duval's pulse and shook his head grimly. "Dead, Poirot." Poirot exhaled, smoothing his moustache. "Then, mon ami, we have stepped into something far greater than we anticipated." He turned to the window, where a figure in a dark coat slipped into the Parisian night. Hastings clenched his fists. "Poirot, we can't let them get away with this." Poirot's gaze hardened. "Oh, they will not, Hastings." His voice was steel. "For now, the game has only just begun." Chapter 19. Shadows in the City of Light 1. A dead man's secret, the body of Lucien Duval lay slumped in his armchair. His lifeless fingers still curled against the edge of the table. The faint smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mixing with the old cigar smoke that clung to the room's heavy drapes. Hercule Poirot did not move. He stood perfectly still, his sharp gaze locked onto the window, where a shadow had just disappeared into the Parisian night. "Hastings," he murmured at last, "quickly, search Duval's pockets." Hastings, still reeling from the sudden gunshot, hesitated. "Poirot, the man's been shot right in front of us. Shouldn't we—" "Mon ami," Poirot interjected, "a man is dead." But he was about to speak before he was silenced. "And that, Hastings, means that whatever he knew is still here, perhaps in his possession. If we do not act now, we may lose the truth forever." Reluctantly, Hastings knelt beside the corpse and began searching the man's pockets. A moment later, his fingers closed around a small folded scrap of paper. He pulled it out and handed it to Poirot. Poirot unfolded it carefully, his eyes narrowing. It was a short note, hastily scrawled in uneven ink. "The whispering widow is not what she seems. The answers lie where the bells do not ring." Hastings frowned. The whispering widow? But Poirot, could he mean the woman who visited us? Poirot's expression was unreadable. "It is a possibility, mon ami. But look at this last line. where the bells do not ring. What do you make of it?" Hastings scratched his head. "A church with silent bells?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Très bien, Hastings, you surprise me. A church where the bells do not ring. It must be a place abandoned, forgotten, and that, I suspect, is where our next clue lies." A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. The butler, pale and shaken, entered. "The police are here, messieurs." Poirot straightened his cuffs. "Bon, then let us see if they can delay us from the truth, or bring us closer to it. C'est tout. The silent bells of Saint-Rémy hour. Later, after an exhaustive round of questioning by the Parisian police, Poirot and Hastings found themselves standing before the abandoned church of Saint-Rémy. The building loomed before them, its once proud bell tower dark and silent. The great bronze bells had long been removed, leaving behind an empty frame. Vines twisted around the broken stonework, and the heavy wooden doors stood slightly ajar. Hastings shivered. "Charming place, Poirot. Looks like something out of a ghost story." Poirot adjusted his hat. "And yet, mon ami, it is no ghost we seek, but the very real murderer who wished Lucien Duval dead." They stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and their footsteps echoed against the cold stone walls. The vast space was empty, save for a few broken pews and a shattered stained-glass window that cast eerie-coloured patterns on the floor. Poirot moved with slow, measured steps, his sharp eyes scanning every corner. Then he stopped abruptly and pointed. "Regardez, Hastings! There, behind the altar." Hastings followed his gaze and saw a small wooden box, half buried beneath a layer of dust. He rushed forward and lifted it, brushing off the cobwebs before opening it. Inside lay a stack of letters, each bearing the initials G.A. Geneviève Armand. Hastings whispered. Poirot took the top letter and read aloud. "I cannot trust anyone, not even those closest to me. If I should disappear, know that it was no accident. I have uncovered something dangerous, something that could destroy them all." Hastings glanced at Poirot. "Destroy who exactly?" Poirot did not answer. Instead, he lifted the next letter, but before he could read it, a creak echoed through the church. Hastings stiffened. "Did you hear that?" Poirot turned his head sharply. Somewhere in the shadows, they were not alone. A meeting in the dark. The sound of footsteps came from the far end of the church. Poirot held up a hand, signalling Hastings to stay still. Then, from the darkness, a low voice whispered, "You should not have come here, Monsieur Poirot." Hastings's hand went instinctively to his pocket, where he kept his pistol, but Poirot gave him a small shake of the head. "And yet, here I am, mon ami," he said calmly, "as you knew I would be." Oh, figure stepped forward, the widow in black. Hastings gasped. "You?" The widow's veil concealed her face, but her voice was steady. "You are walking a path that leads to death, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot tilted his head. "A curious thing to say, madame, considering that death already surrounds us." The widow's hands clenched into fists. "You do not understand. There are forces at work here, far beyond what you know." Poirot took a step closer. "Then tell me, madam, who truly killed Geneviève Armand?" A long silence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she replied, "She did." Hastings reeled. "What? That's impossible." The widow's head bowed. Geneviève Armand faked her own death, and she has lived in the shadows ever since. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Then tell me, madame, if she still lives, why does someone wish to silence her memory? The widow exhaled shakily. Because she knows too much. And now, so do you. A second later, a gunshot shattered the silence. The chase through Paris, the bullet struck the stone pillar beside Poirot, missing him by inches. Hastings yanked him back as another shot rang out. "Run, Poirot!" Hastings shouted. They sprinted toward the church entrance, ducking behind the broken pews as more gunfire echoed through the ancient halls. Poirot's mind raced. Who was behind the attack? And more importantly, what had they just uncovered that someone was willing to kill for? Outside, a black motor car roared to life. A shadowy figure leapt inside, and the vehicle sped off into the Parisian night. Poirot straightened his coat and dusted off his sleeves. "This is most inconvenient, Hastings." Hastings gaped at him. "Poirot, someone just tried to kill us." Poirot nodded. "Oui, mon ami," which means we are getting very close to the truth. Hastings sighed. "So what now?" Poirot adjusted his hat. "Now, mon ami, we find the woman who does not exist." Hastings frowned. "Geneviève Armand?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Exactement." And with that, they disappeared into the Parisian streets, the shadows of a long-buried truth closing in around them. The end.